Welcome to the 6 Ways to Sunday podcast, hosted by award-winning television director, documentary filmmaker, author, and speaker Craig D. Forrest. Join Craig for the next few minutes as he interviews leaders, artists, and creatives about trends and insights shaping our digital world and faith-based media. This podcast is produced and brought to you by Matchstick Media International. Now, here's Craig.
We are talking today to Dr. Craig Detweiler, who is a professor of communication at Pepperdine University. Previously, he was at Fuller Theological Seminary, and before that, he was the department head of cinema and media arts at Biola University, also part of the Biola Media Conference in years past. Craig, there are times that I wish the Apostle Paul were alive today, 2,000 years later, and to hear what he might say or might write about culture, and on top of that, how he would look at the church is there to call people to serve the church rather than the church to serve people. We have a very self-involved cultural society today. How does that change the Christian dynamic?
Well, you see it even in the rise of course, the hashtag of selfie. You know, this is the age where everybody is in a sense, building up their following, considering their friends sort of as an audience. In a sense, we're all performing on social media. We're going to places and events because we want to take the picture and share it. So we may not really even enjoy the event, but we enjoy the opportunity to take the picture about the event.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so this tendency to treat people as an audience rather than as friends or as even as fellow pilgrims along the way is a really vexing tendency. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less.
Ah, that's good.
And unfortunately, most of the social media is designed to say, well, what are you doing and what are you thinking? Give us your status update. In fact, how do you increase your status? By giving us more details about your life. Mm-hmm. So rather than thinking about others, we are being trained to think about ourselves first. So I would, I guess, challenge folks to consider their digital discipleship, to consider how to love and care for others through these digital formats, to put the concerns in the heart of others before we post. Think about what people need to hear. Think about what people need to receive, rather than just what do I want to say and how do I want to position myself and how do I want to manage my own social media profile? How do I bless others through my social media interactions?
I can see the day, foresee the day where there might on staff be the minister of digital discipleship. It could well happen.
It is happening, I think.
I think you're right. It may not be called exactly that, but right. There be a portfolio for people in dealing with media. There is a danger too, Craig. Talk about because there's a sense in media of relationship. There's also a lot of false relationship, and you can naively believe that you're closer to someone than you really are. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, sure. First of all, there's, of course, the catfish phenomenon where, people maybe aren't actually who their profile has created themselves to be. So this need for authenticity, I think, is important. Actually, in that respect, I appreciate that Facebook somewhat tries to insist that you are yourself, that you only have one social media profile to try to deal with that problem. But it's very tough to be, in a sense, our authentic self online. And not just project maybe an ideal version of ourselves and sort of compose the way that we're seen. And it's also exhausting, I think, to manage our social media profiles and have to worry about everything that we tweet or how we position ourselves online. I think folks are challenged to, I guess, do more than just click a like button online. If somebody's sharing their heart, sharing a concern, it really isn't enough to say, gosh, I like that, and maybe write a comment and say, praying for you. Maybe you do need to actually, get in your car and go over to their house,
exactly.
Knock on the door, bring some chicken soup, hug somebody, sit with somebody. It could be that the Christian community would be the last people who believe in the power of presence, who understand that it's important to hold a hand, and to pray with someone physically, and not just in a disembodied way. We are people, think about it, Jesus actually showed how much he believed in the power of the body by being God incarnate, by coming down to earth and putting on flesh. So we believe in the body and the importance of proximity, in a way that maybe others increasingly do not. And perhaps that will be what distinguishes us, is that we care for people physically. We lay hands on people. We help people move. We take meals over to people's houses and care for each other physically, spiritually, mentally, in a holistic kind of way.
Nothing beats the personal touch, does it?
It's increasingly rare and still powerful.
We're talking to media thought leader, filmmaker, and award-winning screenwriter Craig Detweiler on the podcast. Great conversation. We'll be back in 32 seconds after the break.
This podcast features engaging conversations with leaders, artists, and creatives sharing about current trends and insights shaping our digital world and faith-based media. Today's episode is produced by Matchstick Media International, a nonprofit that's passionate about inspiring both visionary leaders and young creatives to harness the power of media to further the gospel. To learn more, visit us at matchstickmedia.org. Now, back to Craig.
We're back having a wonderful conversation with Craig Detweiler, media thought leader, who has a lot to say about our digital world. You bring up the story of Jesus. There's very little in the Gospels of Jesus speaking in synagogues other than a few occasions, especially in Nazareth being the most famous, and nearly being killed for that as he walked through the crowd and went away. And we don't notice Jesus ever going back to his hometown of Nazareth again after that. He camped out in Capernaum after that at Peter's house and stayed there. Jesus was very good at storytelling, and I think in many respects the church has sort of lost track of that in some ways. But now with digital media and visual storytelling, there are more opportunities than ever before. Talk about the power of story. You're a screenwriter. You've written 10 screenplays in your career, and I'm sure you've got 5 other ideas boiling in your mind of screenplays still to be written. Talk about the power of story. I think it's something that sometimes gets lost in our Christian faith.
Well, it's interesting. If you ask somebody like, what would Jesus tweet? That seems kind of like an absurd question. But you think
in 160 characters or less.
Well, that's it. But when you think about it, and some of his greatest teaching is in these very pithy, maybe 140 character sizes. You think about the Sermon on the Mount and how, blessed are the peacemakers, how he was able to take the conventional wisdom of the day to say, you have heard it said, but I say, So he was always sort of putting a twist on his stories. His parables kind of stung at the end. They were like smart bombs that went off later. You couldn't quite even understand them at first. So even just the ambiguity of the way he communicated, right, where he told you a story and maybe didn't tell you what it meant, and forced you to kick it around and debate it and wrestle with it. We're still wrestling with these stories even 2,000 years later. What did he mean? Did he really mean that? What is the implication? Is he talking to me? What's he, So all of those ways in which stories kind of sneak up on you and that you carry around, they're not propositional truths that you kind of turn into a bumper sticker, but they're characters and they're things that I guess cause some self-reflection, that you're not quite sure how to respond to. And I love that about the discipleship process, that it's this ongoing wrestling match with God where you're kind of evaluating yourself and you're evaluating that calling and trying to figure out where you're falling short. And all those things are rooted in character, where you see people making the wrong decisions. And you say, I don't want to be like that person. Or when you make that wrong decision, you say, yeah, I'm a lot like, David in the Bible or Solomon in the Bible or some of these heroes who also had great, great failings. great mistakes that they made along the way. People like Moses, right, who was a murderer, who then was able to turn his life around and lead his people out of Egypt. You know, there's a lot of broken, fractured people in Scripture, and yet Jesus tells these stories of redemption, of hope, of second chances that we can carry with us.
If you had a crowd of 50 pastors, 100 pastors in front of you, in fact, in a way, as you're speaking, you do right now via digital media, and they had very few resources available to them as far as time, people, budget, and money, what would be a couple of steps that they might be able to take to start a media program or have a media presence for either their church or their ministry today?
Well, I feel like everyone has someone in their life who is media savvy. They might be younger than you.
I call them Bezalels, is what I call them.
There you go. That's it. There are gifted people nearby who would love to serve you, your vision, your ministry, and they can do it even on their cell phone. Right? I mean, the cell phone is a camera.
Yeah.
There's editing software available. It's not ideal, but you can edit on the cell phone. You can broadcast via the cell phone. So, everybody has the possibility of being at least a narrowcaster and maybe a broadcaster. And I guess I would take that responsibility seriously and think carefully about how to craft a message that's winsome, that's media savvy, that's refreshing, life-giving, grace-filled, surprising. And if you do that, the beautiful thing about social media is that all those things get forwarded. And you don't necessarily know where the influence stops, right? A link leads to a link, and suddenly it can become a global conversation overnight.
We've had a great conversation in this episode with Craig Detweiler about our digital world. We will be back in our next episode to continue this wonderful, wonderful talk. Hope to hear from you then. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the 6 Ways to Sunday podcast with Craig D. Forrest, brought to you by Matchstick Media International, dedicated to excellence in media through inspiration, vision, and education. To learn more, visit us on the web at matchstickmedia.org. That's matchstickmedia.org. Your generous donations, large or small, help defray costs for producing this creative podcast. Thanks for listening and subscribing.